So as we're reading the story today, guys, just keep in mind the elements of plot. There are quite a few, and maybe it's a little bit far in your mind. So it starts off with, obviously, the exposition. This is where the characters are introduced, and we get to know where the setting of the story is. And the main conflict are typically introduced as well in the exposition. And then there are the three events. Sometimes there's only two, but there's events leading to the climax. And these are events that kind of build up the suspense. And then we get to know what the problem is a little bit before we get to the most exciting part, which is the climax. This is the peak of the story, the major event that occurs in which the main character faces a major enemy, fear, challenge, or other source of conflict. The most action, drama, change, and excitement occurs in the climax here. And obviously, after the climax, we need to resolve that problem. So there are events leading after that. And this is what we call the falling action. So it says it in the word itself, the action itself is falling to be resolved before the resolution. So the falling action, this is where the story begins to slow down and work towards the end, and it ties up loose ends. And the resolution, also known as the denouement, the denouement. So in this word, actually, there is a bit of a derivative of the word nœud. Donc ça défait les nœuds. It kind of undoes all the knots or all the unexplained issues that the character needs to go through to actually conclude his conflict. So the resolution or denouement, also known as the conclusion, is like a concluding paragraph that just resolves any remaining issues and ends the story. So the elements of plot are all these things I just went through, as well as theme. You know, all stories have themes, and themes is basically the moral of the story. If you could resume the story in a few words or in a short phrase, what would that theme be? What would that phrase be? So is it love? Is it friendship? Is it getting even? Is it getting through to yourself and kind of getting to know yourself? Is it acceptance? It could be a whole lot of different things. And there's also point of view. Point of view is who's telling the story. So these points of view can be told in three different ways. It can be first person point of view. And this is where the main character is telling the story through his eyes only. So we're only seeing events through the eyes of the character telling the story. And then there's second person point of view, just like le tu, je, tu, il, nous, vous, il. So the second person point of view, when we think of the French, it would be the tu, or you in English. So this is quite rare in the fictional settings. In second person, the narrator is speaking to you. It's not very common in fiction, unless the narrator is trying to talk to the reader personally. And we see second person point of view mostly in poems, speeches, instructional writing, and persuasive articles. And then there's third person point of view. Third person can be actually divided into three different categories as well. There's third person limited. And with third person limited, it's where the narrator sees only what's in front of him or her, a spectator of events as they unfold, and they're unable to read any other character's mind. So this is third person limited. They're only limited to what his thoughts or her thoughts are. There's also third person omniscient. And this is the all-knowing. It's when the character, the main character, sees all, much as an all-knowing God of some kind. He or she sees what each character is doing and can see into each other's character's mind. This is common with an external character, kind of like he was standing above watching the action below. Like think of a person with a crystal ball peering in. So that's third person omniscient. And then finally, there's third person omniscient, but it's limited omniscient. Okay, so I'm just going to put limited here. And this is where the third person narrator can only see into one character's mind. He or she might see other events happening, but only knows the reasons of one character's actions in the story. So that's third person limited omniscient. Okay, so it's finally time to actually read the story. So The Wife of Bath's Tale from the Canterbury Tales. As we saw, Canterbury is a place in England, and it's a few hours away from the city Bath. that we've been reading about. And since this is the wife of Bath's tale, well, this is just the journey from Bath to Canterbury and the stories that were told amongst the pilgrims while they were on their way to their pilgrimage, being guarded by the knights. This is by Geoffrey Chaucer from the early, I'd say the late 1380s, so the 14th century. So from the mightiest of monarchs and the lowest of peasants, medieval life was built on inequality. But no class of people were more limited in their choices than were women. Geoffrey Chaucer, however, included two female characters in his Canterbury Tales. One of them, the wife of Bath, is as strong and vibrant as the men around her. The wife of Bath is a determined and lusty woman who knows exactly what she wants and how to accomplish it. Before telling the following tale, she relates incidents from her 5 marriages that show that she indeed has had her own way in almost everything. We compare her with the women in her tale and see that she is mocking the olden days of chivalry and its powerless women. So we can already see a few of the themes coming out here, just in this prologue here. So powerlessness, inequality, these are examples of theme that we are going to encounter. In the old days of glory, when King Arthur's round table stood in Camelot, chivalrous knights sat and talked of love. Damsels embroidered tokens of love. Squires composed love songs, and jousts were fought over love. Hardly a word was spoken that was not of love. Only when men and women met did they talk about the weather instead. "How blue the sky is, lady," a young man would say. "And how warm the breeze," she would reply. "And how is your mother?" he would ask. "Quite well, considering the weather," she would answer. Then he would bow, and she would smile, and they would go their separate ways. So it was at Camelot until the hot-blooded Sir Salvio met one day with a lady in a wood. "How blue the sky is today," said the lady, smiling encouragingly. "Almost as blue as your lovely eyes, lady," he said. So in this page 1, we see that there is a simile here. We're comparing her eyes to blue, using the word as. And we've been introduced another of the main characters, Sir Salvio, which is the main knight in the story. The lady blushed. "How prettily the water glistens in the brook." "Almost as sweet to taste as a kiss of your lips," said the knight, and he helped himself to a kiss. The lady picked up her green skirts and shrieked and swooped like a parrot in and out of the trees, all the way back to the court. So the over-romantic knight was summoned before the assembly of the Round Table. "This most starless of knights," said King Arthur, "has cast his shadow over an honorable lady in the wood. What punishment should he suffer?" In one voice, the knights cried, "Death! Cut off his head!" Sir Salvio was most dismayed, but he bowed low from the waist, and Arthur unsheathed his sword. "One last question," said the knight, straightening up again. "Perhaps the excellent Queen Guinevere can tell me. What exactly did I do to offend the lady in the wood?" "What did you do?" exclaimed the queen. "You spoke of kisses when you should have been talking about the weather." "Ah, I see," Sir Salvio sighed, and bowed from the waist again. So on this page here, we see the water glistening in the brook. Good example of imagery. And we see another theme coming up, punishment possibly. And we see how the dialogue is well punctuated with the opening of the closing of the quotation marks and the comma at the right spot. And we also see that there's the beginning of the conflict here. Okay, so we are currently in the rising action, where we see that this knight did something very bad. He doesn't see it that way, but he's being punished, possibly, in a really horrible way, by cutting off his head, possibly, or others, or another way. So the queen says, you spoke of kisses when you should have been talking about the weather. So now Sir Salvio has to face his punishment. I understand, women. The shadow of the sword touched his bare neck. So we just read, Ah, I see, Sir Salvio sighed and bowed from the waist again. I don't think I understand women. The shadow of the sword touched his bare neck. The ladies of the court began to faint. Like swaths of corn behind a sickle, they fell daintily to the floor. The queen herself looked with regret on Sir Salvio. His hair was the color of powdered sage, and as curly as the tendrils of a honeysuckle. Well, well, she said, fluttering her hands, since this young man seeks to understand women, let him answer me this riddle. Let him tell me what women most desire, and he shall live. Arthur leaned warily on his sword. You have 1 year and a day, boy, in which to discover what women most desire. So here we're looking at the conflict. This is what his mission is. As Sir Salvio left the court, his knees trembled and his heart still pounded. What chance did he stand of answering the queen's riddle? What man can guess what a woman is thinking? What do women most desire, he pondered, as his horse shambled along the country roads. Beauty, surely. But then he remembered money. Surely women wanted gold more than anything in the world. He passed a young farm girl on the road, arm in arm with a shepherd. Tell me, good girl, what do you want most in this world? To be rich or to be beautiful? The farm girl hung more heavily on the shepherd's arm and sighed. Neither, sir. All I want is to be married. Aha! The knight took out a quill and wrote on the sleeve of his shirt. Then he turned back, thinking to take the answer to the queen at once. On the way, he passed a convent where nuns, as white as cannikins of milk in the morning sun, were tending a field of beans. What a girl told me could not be true, thought Sir Salvio with dismay. So many women choose to live unmarried. Just then he passed a roadside shrine. In front of it, a woman was down on her knees praying fervently. Forgive me interrupting your prayers, said Sir Salvio, but what is it that you ask so earnestly of God? The woman got painfully to her feet, and took up her baskets again. Only what every woman wants, I suppose, she said bitterly. I want to have a baby. Aha, he said, and noted her words on his sleeve. By sunset, there were 12 other notes written below it. Sir Salvio's heart sank lower and lower. Only one answer could be right. How was he to choose it from the rest? He fingered his bare neck and thought of the sword awaiting it. Farther and farther afield he traveled. Taking ship, he sailed to a hot and passionate country where gypsy women dressed in scarlet, and their dark skin sweated as they danced tarantulas under a tambourine moon. So here we have as white as cannikins of milk in the morning sun, which is an example of a simile again. But there's also an idiom here. I'm not sure if you saw it. Sir Salvio's heart sank lower and lower. So your heart can actually sink. So we're just using that idiom to express the fact that he was feeling really, really low here. So if we go back to the previous line, what do women most desire? He asked a girl as she whirled past his stirrup, tossing her lace-edged petticoats. Fun, of course, cried the gypsy. Fun and laughter and love and music and passion and the clash of the moon and the spark of the stars and to stay young forever. Thank you very much. He could find no scrap of sleeve on which to write all her answers. On and on he traveled through lands of ice where women would not part their frozen lips to answer him, through wastelands where all the women wanted was the next meal for their children. Finally, time ran short, and he turned back to keep his appointment with the king's deadline. To be 1 day late at Camelot would dishonor him, for the other knights would think he was fearful of the sword's edge. So it was that he came to be riding at a gallop through the forests of Dean on the last day when he saw an old crone boiling up water in a cauldron. "Old woman," he shouted out, "boil my shirt, for I have slept in it this year past, and today I must present myself before the Queen of England." He handed her the shirt on which he had scrawled the answer of every woman he had met. The old hag held up each sleeve in turn. "Well, what's this then?" she lisped through 2 black teeth. "Love, money, passion, power, beauty, children, long life, fame? These are the stuff of women's wishes." "Mind your own business, Weasley one, and boil the shirt. I'm sick and tired of asking what women most desire." The shirt plunged into the cauldron, and the bubbles that rose gave strangely feminine sighs. "What women most desire? Oh, I can tell you that, lording. But my answer has a price. What I desire most is to marry a handsome knight with hair of just your color and curls of just your kind. If I were to tell you the answer, you would have to marry me." "I'd gladly marry even you, Dame Cockroach, for the sake of the right answer. But I've heard so many now that I dare say I've already heard yours from someone else." The old crone shrugged her humped shoulders and gave him back his shirt, dripping and steaming. "What women most desire is to have their own way in everything," she said. "Fine, fine," Sir Salvio galloped off, intent on keeping his appointment with the Queen. Knee to knee at the round table, the knights of King Arthur sat playing cards. The ladies sat talking of love amongst themselves. "I hardly expected to see you again, boys," said the king. The women's chatter subsided. The kings at the table turned to listen. "And have you found an answer to my riddle?" asked the queen. So here where she's asking him to marry her, this is where it gets complicated. So this is where the complications begin. Life is not so simple for this knight. "And have you found an answer to my riddle?" asked the queen. Sir Salvio knelt and kissed the hem of her robe. "Madam, I have 1,000. Then he searched his shirt sleeves for just one that might save his life, but the shining whiteness of the linen almost blinded him. And just as the sleeves were clean of words, so was his memory a blank. The only answer he could recollect was the one he had been told. What women most desire is to have their own way in everything." "Oh, sorcery!" squeaked the queen in delicious horror. "No man ever worked that out for himself. I'm glad you have saved your life, Sir Salvio, for your hair is the color of powdered sage and as curly as the tendrils of the honeysuckle. But who told you the answer?" "I did," Queen Guinevere croaked an elderly voice, and there, perched on the back of the knight's horse where it stood, tethered by the door, was the old forest crone. Her legs were as thin and knobbled as a chicken's. Here and there she had hair, but it grew only where it should not. The ladies of the court put their handkerchiefs to their mouths and gave little cries of distaste. "I told this fair knight the answer, and in return he promised to marry me. Don't look so surprised to see me, sweetheart. I jumped up behind you as you put on your shirt. I did not want to delay our marriage by so much as a single day." So here we have really good examples of descriptive language, where that imagery is jumping in, and we have a really good description of what this lady looks like. In a gesture of wild despair, Sir Salvio threw himself headlong at King Arthur's feet. "Lord, be merciful and cut off my head here and now, for life will be worse than death if I have to marry this... Sir," the queen's voice was loud and forbidding, "kindly remember that chivalry is the first law of this court." But the knight bared his neck and thrust his sword into King Arthur's hand. "Please, cut off my head, your majesty." Like a monstrous land crab, half in and half out of its skin, The hag limped forward. Nay, for that would deprive me of my reward. I claim my husband, and the law must give him to me. Then Sir Salvio threw himself at her pigeon-toed feet. Take my horse, take my sword, my armor, take everything I own in the world, but spare my body. You don't know how I have dreamed of one day tasting love in the arms of a young and lovely wife. The antique bride gave one wild shriek of laughter and linked her arm through his. I am yours to command now, my husband, she said. Yours as much as your horse or your sword or the shirt on your back. Then the king joined the hands of the bride and groom. I give you the white wing of Camelot for your nuptial home. Never was there a wedding celebrated with fewer smiles and less dancing. The groom led his bride directly to the white wing, thinking to hide his shame within its walls. At the foot of the stairs, she tugged on his arm. This is the threshold of our home, she said in a voice that crackled like burning stubble. So lift me in your arms and carry me over the threshold. Sharp with bones and as heavy as brass, she weighed like a ship's anchor in his arms, but he carried her to their bedchamber and laid her on the white bed. I'll sleep in the next room, lady. Nay, for then we would not be married. Man and wife should sleep in the same bed. Sir Salvio lay down beside her on his clothes, staring at the ceiling, and tears ran down into his ears. Beside him she smiled a toothless and frothy smile. Is this any way to behave on your wedding night? She said. What I have done, tell me, sweetheart, nothing, but save your life by answering the queen's riddle. What's the matter with me, love? What's the matter with you? He gave a great groan. Nothing you could alter, lady. You're an ugly, old washerwoman. That's all. She gave another of those cacophonous laughs. Is it my ugliness, then? Why, I thought you'd be glad. He lifted himself on one elbow and stared at her, his eyes blinded with tears. Glad? Yes, glad. A pretty wife is often a worry to a man. All the time he's away fighting or questing, or taking his horse to the blacksmith. He has it in his mind to wonder, what is she doing now? Which of my friends is flirting with her? Has she run off yet with my squire or my serving man? He nodded his head and smiled forlornly. In all my travels during this last year, I have not met one pretty woman I would trust. And he closed his eyes in despair. But when he opened them up again, there on the bed beside him, in a gown of green velvet that put him in mind of cedar trees, lay the lady of his dreams. Her hair was the color of powdered honeysuckle, and she smelt of sage. Only in the days of glory, where fairies were as many as the motes of dust floating in a sunbeam, could a man have found himself married to a fairy. Yes, it is still I, the washerwoman from the forest, said the fairy bride. And now the choice is yours. Will you have me like this, or in my other form? Shall I be ugly, but love you truly all the days of your life? Or shall I be beautiful and a worry to you each night of your life? Shall I be waiting here for you every evening, bent and crooked, but loving and loyal? Or shall I be beautiful when I hang on your arm in the gardens and in the great moot hall, when there are other eyes to wink at me? Come on, decide now and never speak of it again. So since most of Wife of Bath's tale has been concerned with educating the knight about women, this point at which he has to use that knowledge to choose the correct answer is the climax. The choice the lovely lady offers him, moreover, will determine the outcome of the rest of his life. It doesn't get much more climatic than that. So in all his travels, he had never seen so lovely a lady. Sir Salvio breathed in to claim her beauty. Yes, he would have her be beautiful. So this is his original thought, and this is creating suspense. This being a fairy tale, we suspect that the choice the loathly lady offers the knight is some kind of test. So the whole time he's answering, we're wondering, is he going to ace it? Or in keeping with his past actions, will he fail miserably? So this is all building up suspense. Then he suddenly thought of the white sleep he would lose lying in the white wing of Camelot, while his wife was dancing the night away with other men. He thought of how the bright light of her beauty would show up all the lines and wrinkles of his old age, and she would tire of him. And he thought of the evil of owning a lovely wife without owning her love. "Lady Fairy and wife of my life," he said at last, "since I learned today what women most desire, I know that you, not I, must choose. Be beautiful or be good, it shall be as you desire." So he's giving her the chance to decide for him. The fairy gave one wild whoop of laughter and put her arms around his neck. Her mouth was a well of kisses. Because you gave this answer," she said, "you may have me in my fairy shape and keep my love and loyalty always. I will be good and faithful, and I will be always waiting for you here in the white wing of Camelot. For never in the history of human beings has a man learned so quickly what women most desire." So every night the white wing of Camelot resounded to their laughter. And during the day Sir Salvio was the envy of every other knight, for he had a wife who never talked about the weather, and who liked nothing better than a kiss in the wood from her beloved knight. And so when he was able to give her the huge task of deciding for him and kind of putting all the power, this is one of the main themes, the power in her hands, it proves that he learned his lesson. And that all these loose ends, all the undecisiveness, all of the things that he was debating have been resolved. And so we're untying all the loose ends, and we are discovering all the little things that we need to figure out to get this story to the conclusion, which is here, where it basically says that they will live happily ever after. And voila, the wife of Fast.